After 80 years, life continues to surprise, sometimes putting even the most hardened and independent individuals in a difficult position. We will talk about 5 non-obvious, but almost inevitable aspects that everyone who has crossed this age threshold faces. These are not only physiological changes or soulless data from medical reports. These are deeper, more subtle metamorphoses in relation to others, in the feeling of time, and in how one's own memories begin to reveal new facets. Perhaps some of these changes are already familiar, but have not yet received due understanding. Others may come as a complete surprise, but all of them undoubtedly affect our perception of aging. Awareness of these metamorphoses can bring peace, a sense of purpose, and even new strength. There is something incredibly inspiring in naming your experiences and understanding that you are not alone in this journey. First, reduction of social circle. One of the first, subtle but noticeable changes after 80 is a significant reduction in social interaction. Of course, phone calls are made from time to time, rare visits occur, but their frequency is no longer the same. And it's not even about that, but about the transformed feeling. What once seemed like a natural rhythm of friendship and communication now feels fragmented and vulnerable. Friends move to other cities, face ailments, or pass away. Family members are immersed in their own concerns. Imperceptibly, a person begins to spend more time in silence than in communication. This is not bitterness, but a statement of fact. Few openly talk about how difficult it is to maintain connections at this age. The number of invitations decreases, the intervals between visits increase, and even if there has never been an acute need for constant company, the silence sounds louder than expected. A person begins to reflect more, not only out of longing, but also as a way to keep loved ones close, at least in memory. Memories of shared laughter, of simple everyday things that were once taken for granted, now seem like priceless treasures. And there is nothing reprehensible in experiencing these feelings. This is not weakness or loneliness in the usual sense. This is a quiet adaptation that almost everyone faces, but few are prepared for. That is why emotional connection with oneself, with one's history, even with one or two close people, becomes more important than ever. After all, when the crowd disappears, the meaning contained in deep connections becomes invaluable. Second, how minor ailments turn into serious problems. Another reality that often catches you off guard after 80 is that even minor health problems cease to be so. A common cold lasts much longer than before. A small bruise takes weeks, not days, to heal. A minor oversight that would have been forgotten by lunchtime can now turn into weeks of rehabilitation therapy or even surgery. It's not just about slowing down physiological processes. The body's ability to regenerate undergoes tangible changes. Its reliability decreases. The reserve of vitality is gradually depleted, and even minor factors such as skipping a meal or insufficient fluid intake can disrupt the functioning of the entire system. A person may still feel a surge of energy, and in many ways this is indeed the case, but the former margin of safety no longer provides the same invisible and effective support as in youth. What once happened by itself now requires conscious attention, care, and patience. Unfortunately, this topic rarely becomes the subject of open discussion. Relatives, family members, and even medical professionals are often inclined to explain the changes that are taking place by age. But the difference in sensations becomes more and more obvious. Each recovery is more difficult, and energy recovery takes much longer. The problem lies not only in the physical, but also in the emotional aspect. The realization that the body no longer functions with the same harmony can cause feelings of frustration and annoyance. It is especially difficult for people who have always been proud of their activity, efficiency, and independence to experience this. For them, such changes may feel like a betrayal by their own body. However, awareness of the problem is already half the solution. By carefully listening to the reactions of your body, you can adapt to new conditions. You can slow down the pace without giving up an active life. It is important to understand exactly what the body needs now. More rest, sufficient water intake, a compassionate attitude towards yourself. At this stage of life, it's important not to prove your invincibility, but to carefully manage your remaining strength and stop taking it for granted. Sometimes, the bravest and wisest decision is to allow yourself a full recovery. Thirdly, it's about fading discreetly from the view of others. One of the most painful aspects that people over 80 face is how quickly they become ignored. This isn't out of malice, but due to subtle cultural shifts that few are aware of. A person enters a room, but their arrival no longer elicits the same reaction as before. They start speaking and are interrupted, not out of rudeness, but because it's subconsciously assumed they've already finished their thought. They notice they have to repeat themselves, wait longer to be heard, or feel invisible in conversations, even among family. The problem isn't just being ignored. It's about gradually disappearing from a world that moves at great speed and values youth above all else. Few are prepared for this. Age seems to precede the person, entering the room first. Their stories, thoughts, and life experiences are brushed aside, even though they now hold more wisdom and truth than ever before. A person has lived a long life. They've lost, loved, suffered, and rejoiced. Yet at times, their presence seems insignificant. This reality can evoke a range of emotions: sadness, disappointment, even quiet grief. But it's important to acknowledge these changes as a given. This isn't a measure of a person's worth, but rather a reflection of a culture that often forgets the need to listen to the older generation. A person doesn't become invisible. It's just that the world isn't always ready to immediately acknowledge their presence, but their voice still matters. And those who find the strength to truly see them, hear their stories, appreciate their humor and wise reflections, are the people who truly matter. They know how to listen, even if it takes them a little longer to pay attention. Therefore, don't give up. Don't let silence define your identity. It should be about what you've experienced, the difficulties you've overcome. It's important to radiate calmness and confidence, being a living embodiment of grace, wisdom, and unwavering resilience. Perhaps this person's voice isn't the loudest in the general chorus, but their life experience, their depth and insight carry far more weight than it may seem at first glance. It's this experience that becomes the invisible force that attracts and inspires others. The narrowing of one's living space is one of the most palpable and painful aspects of aging, especially after 80. Not only is there a transformation of the inner world, but also a gradual disappearance of the familiar external environment. Life, previously filled with routines, socializing with loved ones, and visiting favorite places, begins to relentlessly shrink. This process doesn't happen suddenly but gradually, step by step. A person may notice they leave their home less and less, not because of a diminished interest in the world around them, but because distances seem greater, and any activity requires more effort. Friends with whom they once shared joys and sorrows move to other cities, suffer from illnesses, or pass away. Neighbors change, and familiar places close forever. The world doesn't collapse overnight, but slowly and steadily decreases in size, leaving behind a sense of emotional emptiness. Loneliness, like a barely audible background noise, gradually increases, becoming an increasingly palpable burden. Even for those who have always been independent and self-reliant, observing the disappearance of their familiar way of life causes anxiety and concern. However, acknowledging this fact, understanding the changes taking place, and accepting them as inevitable is a sign of strength, not weakness. By calling things by their names, allowing oneself to grieve for what has been lost, a person gains clarity of mind and peace of soul. It's a quiet sadness from realizing that parts of life are irrevocably fading, not because the person has stopped fighting, but because they cared. But it's important to remember that, despite the narrowing of the familiar world, there is always room for growth and development. This growth may not manifest in travel or grand achievements, but in deep, candid conversations, interactions with younger generations, or the sharing of memories that previously didn't seem so valuable. Life doesn't have to be vast to be rich and fulfilling. The main thing is to maintain its significance and fill it with meaning. Therefore, it's worth making that important call, even if it's long distance, joining that interesting group, even if it only exists in virtual space, or taking a short walk, even if it's just to the end of the street. The world around you may change, but it is not over. It continues to change and develop, offering many opportunities for laughter, connection, and joy. The unpredictability of one's own body is another difficult problem faced by people after 80. The body begins to send contradictory signals, often at the most inopportune moments. One day, a person wakes up with a clear mind, a firm gait, and enough energy to perform any task. But the very next day, they may feel sluggish, distracted, and not understand why their knees are stiff and their hands can't hold a cup of coffee as they used to. It's not just the physical discomfort that's unpleasant, but also the feeling of betrayal by one's own body. A person has lived in it all their life, trusted it and relied on it, and now it suddenly changes the rules of the game without warning. You might plan a walk in the fresh air, but suddenly feel an overwhelming wave of fatigue that could not have been foreseen. You might bend down to tie a shoelace and be surprised to find that getting back up takes much more time and effort than before. Or you might suddenly experience dizziness, stiffness in your movements, or a strange tingling that disappears as quickly as it appeared. It is often unspoken that such unpredictability disrupts not only the usual way of life but also self-confidence. Life after 80 often presents a kaleidoscope of surprises, forcing one to rethink many things. Imagine this scene. A person having gathered to leave the house suddenly stops, overcome with doubt. And the reason lies not in a lack of desire, but in the treacherous feeling of unreliability in their own body. This sudden vulnerability can shake confidence even in situations where one previously felt absolute steadfastness, which is quite understandable. But there is an undeniable truth that instills optimism. Even if the physical shell is not what it used to be, the reaction to it can be adjusted, and it is this flexibility that becomes a new source of strength. Adaptability becomes an invaluable tool. A person gradually learns to carefully plan their actions, rationally distribute energy, and treat themselves with patience and understanding, rather than with irritation and reproach. They begin to listen more attentively to the signals of their body, giving themselves the opportunity to rest when necessary, taking time to warm up, and seeking advice from a doctor, not only when problems arise but also for prevention, to better understand how to act proactively. After all, knowledge, even in the face of uncertainty, restores a sense of control over the situation. Thus, even if the body has lost its former reliability, experience and awareness allow one to maintain control over one's own life. We have considered some of the harsh realities that people who have passed the age of 80 often face. Each of them is unique in its own way and can subtly change the perception of the world around them. From the narrowing circle of loved ones to physical unpredictability that strikes at the most inopportune moment. These changes often come as a surprise, like a bolt from the blue. However, it is important to realize the following. Acknowledging these changes is not a surrender to inevitable decline, but a conscious step towards life, to live it more fully, wisely, and freely. Which of the above aspects touched you the most? Which of these realities have you observed in your own life, or perhaps in the lives of people close to you? Ultimately, aging is not a loss of value, but the acquisition of a new, deeper perspective on life. And when we face these realities together, we strengthen not only ourselves, but also support each other.